In the 1960s, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration had a problem that no amount of money could solve with chemicals. They were about to send men to the moon, and they had to keep the drinking water on the spacecraft clean for days in a sealed metal can, with no way to resupply and no margin for a single mistake. Chlorine was too harsh, too heavy, too unstable for a capsule. So their engineers reached past every modern chemical they had, and they reached for a metal. They ran a faint electric current through silver and later copper, and let the charged ions do the work. The astronauts who walked on the moon drank water kept safe by metal. 20 years later, that exact method quietly slipped into a few swimming pools in America. And the people who swam in those pools noticed something strange. There was no sting in their eyes, no green tint in their hair, no heavy chemical smell rising off the surface in the heat. The water was soft and clear, and it stayed that way, and the owners were not buying chlorine by the barrel anymore. That technology is older than you are. It is documented. It is sitting in pools right now. And if you own a pool, or you are ever going to, this is not a curiosity. This is a working plan that was meant for you. I grew up swimming in a spring-fed pond behind my grandfather's place. No chemicals, no pump, no filter, just cold, clean water that never turned green, and we never once asked why. Then a few summers ago, I stood at the edge of a backyard pool outside Berlin, Ohio, owned by a man who had not had a barrel of chlorine delivered in over 3 years. The water was glass. I asked him what he was using. He smiled and pointed at a small box plumbed into the line, no bigger than a lunch pail, and he said one word: copper. Stay with me, because what he was doing is documented in 3 places: the drinking water systems of the Apollo spacecraft, a set of pool studies from the 1980s, and a small electric box humming quietly beside a pool pump in Holmes County, Ohio. It is on record, and the reason you have never heard of it is almost stranger than if someone had hidden it. Let me take you back, much further back than the Apollo program. The ancient Egyptians wrote it down in their oldest medical texts, before the pyramids were old. Use copper to keep water clean. The Greeks did it. The Romans lined their cisterns and their bath fittings with it. For thousands of years, across civilizations that never spoke to one another, the same quiet truth kept surfacing. Water that touches copper stays safe. They did not know why. They only knew that it worked. Then, in 1893, a Swiss scientist named Carl Wilhelm von Nageli finally caught it in the act. He found that copper releases a steady, invisible stream of charged particles, copper ions, and that those ions are lethal to bacteria and algae in amounts so small you cannot see them, cannot taste them, and cannot measure them without a laboratory. He gave it a name almost nobody outside a chemistry department has ever heard: the oligodynamic effect. Oligo meaning small, dynamic meaning powerful, a small thing with enormous power. Here is what those charged copper ions actually do in your pool water. Algae and bacteria carry a negative charge on their cell walls. A copper ion carries a positive one. So the ion does not drift past the algae. It is pulled toward it, the way a magnet finds iron. It punches into the cell, scrambles the machinery inside, and the green simply never gets a foothold. The water does not go cloudy. The walls do not go slick. The pool stays clear, not because you shocked it back from the edge every week, but because nothing was ever allowed to grow in the first place. That is the part the modern pool industry would rather you not think too hard about. Because here is what those 1980s studies found when engineers put copper and silver ions into swimming pools as an alternative to chlorine. The water stayed clean, the algae stayed gone, and the amount of harsh chemical you had to pour in dropped through the floor. Some systems cut chlorine demand by half. Many cut it far more than that. The copper did the steady, patient, daily work of keeping things from growing. And the result was a pool that did not smell like a chemical plant and did not burn the eyes of every child who opened them underwater. And that smell, let me stop on that for a second, because most people have it exactly backwards. That sharp chlorine smell at a public pool is not the sign of a clean pool. It is the sign of an overworked one. It is the smell of chlorine that is already bonded with sweat and oils and is struggling to keep up. A pool running on copper with only a whisper of sanitizer behind it does not produce that smell at all, because the copper never let the load build up in the first place. So sit with that. A method known since the Romans, proven in the 80s, trusted by NASA in outer space, quietly keeps a pool cleaner and gentler than a barrel of chemicals. And almost every pool in America still runs on the barrel. Why? And this is where the story turns, because I am not going to tell you that some committee locked copper in a vault to protect the chemical companies. The truth is stranger, and in its own way, it is worse. Nobody had to bury copper. Chlorine simply won, on three things that have nothing to do with which one keeps your water nicer. First, cost. Chlorine is dirt cheap. You can buy it by the bucket at any store in the country. Second, speed. A public pool with 200 bodies in it on a hot Saturday has to kill what those bodies bring in, fast, within minutes. Chlorine does that. Copper is patient. It is brilliant at stopping algae and holding the water clear day after day, but it is slow against a sudden contamination, and a crowded public pool cannot afford slow. So the health codes for public pools were written around chlorine, because for a packed municipal pool, that speed is genuinely a safety feature, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. Third, and this is the quiet one, chlorine is a product you have to buy again every single week, forever. Copper electrodes get changed about once a year. You cannot build a route truck, a delivery schedule, and a recurring invoice around a metal that just sits there working. You can build all of that around a chemical that disappears. So chlorine became the default, not because copper failed, but because copper does not fit the way the business is built. And a method that could have made millions of backyard pools gentler and cheaper to run became a niche that most pool owners have never even heard the name of. So here's the question you should be asking right now. If a crowded public pool needs the speed of chlorine, what about the quiet pool in your own backyard, with your own family in it, that does not? If you have made it this far, you already understand more about your own pool than the company that sold it to you ever told you. And if you want the complete blueprint, the exact system, the levels that actually work, the way the old-timers and the engineers both set this up, so the copper does the heavy lifting and you barely touch a chemical all summer, I have laid it all out in the Copper Pool Guide. The link is in the description below. Now let me show you why this is not just for someone with a big in-ground pool and money to spend. You do not need a fancy pool. The man near Berlin, Ohio, did not have one. It was an ordinary above-ground pool, the kind a family puts up in a weekend. And bolted into the return line was a small copper ionizer, drawing almost no power, sending a controlled trickle of copper ions into the water every time the pump ran. That was the whole secret: a box, a metal rod, and a pump that was going to run anyway. The same principle works on the smallest setups there are. A stock tank pool, a little above-ground ring, a plunge pool on a back patio. Wherever water sits in the sun and wants to turn green, copper is the oldest answer there is. Farmers have known the trough version of this for generations. Drop a piece of copper in the stock tank and the green scum never comes. A pool is just a very large, very clean trough that people happen to sit in. And before I show you exactly how the old family set this up, one quick thing, and everything I keep pulling out of these farmhouses, the borax that replaces a year of cleaning products, the 9-cent treatments, the copper kettle that has outlived 4 generations, and now the copper that keeps a pool clear without a chemical truck. I have put all of it in one place. It is called the Amish Home System. The link is in the description. Now, the technique. And here is the part that matters more than anything else in this entire video. The copper does the work, but you keep a whisper of sanitizer behind it, and that is not a failure of the system. That is the system. Here is the detail the old-timers knew, and most people selling copper online leave out. Copper is the workhorse. It holds the water clear. It keeps the algae from ever starting. It does 90% of the daily job. But copper is patient, and your family's safety cannot be patient. So you run a small, steady residual of an actual sanitizer in the background as the safety net. a fraction of what a chlorine-only pool burns through, but never zero. The copper means you barely use it. The whisper of sanitizer means that the moment something goes into that water, it gets handled fast. Copper plus a touch of sanitizer is a clean, gentle, low-chemical pool. Copper alone, with nothing behind it, is a gamble with your kids. And the man in Ohio would have been the first to tell me so. And the second half of the detail, the dose. Copper works in a narrow band, and the whole art is staying inside it. Too little, and the algae creeps back. Too much, and the copper that was keeping your water clear starts staining the plaster green, tinting blonde hair, leaving a haze. More is not better. More was never better. The old families understood this about copper the same way they understood it about everything. The power and the danger live in the same place, and the entire craft is in the amount. You hold copper in that thin band. You keep a breath of sanitizer behind it, and the pool runs itself all summer. That balance is the secret. Anyone telling you to rip out every chemical and trust the metal alone has never read a single page of how this works, and they could get someone sick. Now, this is where I have to tell you about the part I almost did not believe until I read the studies myself, because that small copper box on a backyard pool is the same idea NASA trusted to keep astronauts alive in space, and it did not stop in the pool. In 1994, engineers took the same copper-silver method and aimed it at a hospital that had been haunted for years by Legionella, the bacteria behind Legionnaire's disease, the kind that breeds in the pipes and the warm water of big buildings and kills the vulnerable. They sent charged copper ions through the entire water system, and the hospital stopped having cases. Not fewer, stopped. Today, that quiet technology is recognized by the World Health Organization and the Environmental Protection Agency, and it runs in the basements of more than 100 hospitals, sending charged copper ions through every pipe around the clock, hunting bacteria by their opposite charge in water nobody ever thinks twice about. That is the climax of the whole story, the thing that kept the Apollo astronauts' water safe on the way to the moon. The thing that emptied the Legionella out of hospital pipes. The thing keeping a backyard pool in Ohio clear without a chemical truck. It is all the same thing. It is all copper. And we built an entire industry that mostly stepped right over it. So why did it fade? Why is something this good, this old, this proven, this trusted by people who could not afford to be wrong, sitting at the edges of the pool world instead of the center? I think the honest answer is the hardest one. A metal that does its job quietly for a year at a time, asking nothing, getting changed once a season, is a very hard thing to build a business around. You cannot sell someone copper every week. You sell it once, it works, and it just keeps working. The pool industry runs on the bucket you buy again on Saturday, and the bucket after that, and the one after that. Copper does not fit on that root truck, so it slipped off of it. But forgetting is not the same as losing. The studies are still on the record. The physics never changed. The man in Ohio is still swimming in glass-clear water he barely treats. And the same freedom NASA built for the astronauts, clean water from a metal, not a chemical you have to keep buying, is sitting in a box the size of a lunch pail that you can plumb into your own pool line this weekend.